Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we are going deep on something I'm sure many of you are familiar with, naproxen.
A familiar friend,
Right?
or foe, maybe both.
Right. I mean, it's in so many medicine cabinets. But the truth is, most of us probably don't know that much about it, like where it came from, how it's made, all the rules and regulations surrounding it.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Exactly. And that's where our deep dive comes in. We've pulled together a whole bunch of research, scientific papers, regulatory documents.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff, all to give you a real comprehensive picture of naproxen, and all without you having to actually read through all those sources yourself.
We've done the work so you don't have to.
Precisely. So let's get started with a little history. Our sources tell us that naproxen was first developed by a company called Syntex Corporation
Sure.
back in the late 1960s.
Late 60s, yeah. Got the patent in 1967.
1967. Now here's where things get kind of interesting. Syntex. They weren't originally known for pain relievers at all.
Not at all.
So what were they known for?
This is the cool part. They were actually pioneers in steroid chemistry. Like way back when.
Steroids.
Yeah, steroid hormones.
Oh.
Syntex. They started in Mexico City, 1944. And they made their name synthesizing hormones, like progesterone and cortisone. From, get this, Mexican yams.
Wait. Back up. So the same company that made the naproxen we know today started out working with yams.
Pretty much.
That is wild.
Right. It's a fascinating connection, but it really speaks to their expertise in chemistry. And a bunch of brilliant scientists were the driving force behind it all, like Russell Marker, Emmerich Somlo, George Rosencrantz.
It's amazing how many names are involved in these kinds of discoveries.
Oh, absolutely. We can't forget Carl Djerassi, Alejandro Zaffaroni, Luis Miramontes, and Albert Bowers. Each of them played a huge role in shaping Syntex's scientific foundation.
Were they all focused on the yam stuff?
Well, they were all involved in steroid research at Syntex, so yeah, probably the yams too at some point, but they branched out. Like Miramontes, he was key in developing one of the first oral contraceptives.
See, this is what I love about these deep dives. You just never know where it's going to go. Okay, so we've got Syntex, experts in steroids.
Yeah.
How did they end up creating naproxen? Like, how did that fit into their whole thing?
Well, it actually shows how Syntex was evolving as a company.
Evolving how?
They were looking beyond just steroids.
Yeah.
They wanted to make their mark in other areas of medicine. And pain relief, that's a huge area.
For sure. Everyone experiences pain.
Exactly. And naproxen was their chance to really innovate.
So they decided, let's get into the pain relief game.
And not just get into it. They wanted to improve it.
So what were the problems with the pain relievers that already existed back then?
Okay, so think about ibuprofen.
Ibuprofen. Got it.
It works great for pain and inflammation. But the problem is it's pretty short-acting, which means
We got to take it more often.
bingo. And that's where naproxen came in. They designed it to be longer lasting, a longer half-life, fewer doses,
More sustained relief. I'm starting to see why they thought it would be a game changer. So they invented it in the late 60s. But when did it actually become available for people to use?
Well, it got approved for prescription use in the U.S. in 1976.
1976.
Where doctors could prescribe it under the brand name Naproxen.
Naproxen.
Remember that one?
Rings a bell.
But honestly, most people probably know it as
Illife.
a love.
Yeah.
And that happened in 1994. Huge moment. Went from prescription only to over-the-counter, so anyone could just walk into a store and buy it.
Much easier to get your hands on.
Way easier. No doctor's visit needed.
Okay. So we've talked about Syntex's journey, how they started with yams, then got into pain relief.
Yeah.
But what happened to Syntex in all of this?
Okay, so in 1994, same year Alev hit the shelves, Syntex got acquired by Roche, big pharmaceutical company.
Oh, wow.
And then a bunch of mergers and spin-offs happened. And that's why you see naproxen today with all sorts of different names, brand names, generics. It's kind of all over the place.
Got it. So naproxen's story is really tied to the whole evolution of the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now let's get into what naproxen actually does. What's it used for?
So naproxen is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug.
We've heard that term before, NSAID. What does that even mean?
It means it helps with both pain and inflammation. It's not a steroid, like what Syntex was originally known for, but it targets those inflammatory processes in the body, which is why it's approved for so many things.
Like what?
Well, for starters, it's used for chronic inflammatory diseases, like rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, ankylosing spondylitis.
Those are some serious conditions.
Yeah. And it's also used for polyarticular juvenile idiopathic arthritis.
So it's not just for adults.
Nope. It can help kids too, unfortunately.
Poor.
But it's not all chronic conditions. It's also approved for more acute problems like tendinitis, bursitis, gout flare-ups, and of course for general pain, mild to moderate pain. And good news for anyone who menstruates, it's also used for period cramps, primary dysmenorrhea.
Okay, so basically anything that hurts.
Well, not anything,
Yep.
but it does cover a pretty wide range of pain and inflammation.
Now, I've also seen naproxen with different names, like Naproxen
Naproxen.
and Vimovo. What's the deal with those?
Those are just different formulations.
Yeah.
You know, like variations on the original. Naproxen, that's a controlled release version. Naproxen sodium, specifically. It's designed for once daily dosing. Longer relief.
Convenience factor.
Exactly. And then Vimovo, that's actually a combo pill.
Combo pill.
It has naproxen, but it also has something called asymmetric magnesium, which is a proton pump inhibitor.
Why add that in?
Protection.
Protection from what?
Well, NSAIDs, they can sometimes cause stomach problems,
Oh.
especially in people who are already prone to ulcers or other GI issues.
Yeah.
So Vimovo combines the pain relief with something to help protect the stomach lining.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah, it's all about managing those risks.
Now, I know doctors can sometimes prescribe medications for things that aren't specifically listed on the FDA-approved label. What about naproxen? Any off-label uses?
It's definitely possible.
Mm.
You know, doctors have some leeway to use their judgment, especially if there's evidence to support it. But the thing is, our sources didn't go into too much detail about specific off-label uses.
So we don't really know for sure.
Not from the sources we have.
Okay, makes sense.
But we can make some educated guesses
Yeses.
based on what we know. You know,
Yeah.
naproxen is great for pain and inflammation.
Right.
So it stands to reason that doctors might use it for other conditions where those are key factors. Again, it's all about the doctor's assessment, the patient's needs.
So off-label use is really a case-by-case thing.
Pretty much.
Okay. Now, I want to get into how naproxen compares to other common pain relievers.
Oh yeah, the pain relief lineup.
Right. So let's start with ibuprofen, because they both seem pretty similar.
They are in some ways, both NSAIDs.
Yeah.
Both good for pain and inflammation. But there's a key difference.
What's the difference?
Duration, like how long they last. Ibuprofen, that's about 2 hours.
Okay.
Naproxen, around 12 to 17 hours.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Huge. It means you can take naproxen less often, which can be a big plus for some people.
For sure. Less pills to swallow. So for general pain, they're both effective.
Yeah, generally speaking. Though some studies have shown that they might not be exactly equal for all types of pain. Like there's some research that suggests ibuprofen might be a bit better for acute dental pain.
Interesting.
But for something like knee osteoarthritis, they seem to be pretty comparable at the doses you can buy over the counter. So it often comes down to personal preference, or what your doctor recommends.
Okay. What about acetaminophen? Like Tylenol. That's another big one.
Right, acetaminophen, that one's a bit different.
Different how?
It's not an NSAID. It works in a totally different way. It's good for pain and fever, but not so much for inflammation.
Ah, so if inflammation is the main problem, naproxen would be the better choice.
Yeah, most likely. Though there's also the safety aspect.
What do you mean?
Well, with acetaminophen, the big concern is liver damage
Yeah.
if you take too much.
Right.
With NSAIDs, like naproxen, it's more about gastrointestinal and cardiovascular risks.
So it's really about picking the right tool for the job and understanding the potential risks.
Exactly.
Okay. Can't forget about aspirin. Good old aspirin.
Oh, aspirin, the classic.
Where does that fit in?
So aspirin is kind of in the same family as naproxen. You know, it helps with pain and inflammation. But naproxen is usually easier on the stomach, especially if you need higher doses for the anti-inflammatory effects.
Good to know.
Aspirin, though, it has that unique thing with preventing cardiovascular events at low doses because of how it affects blood clotting. That's not really a primary use for naproxen.
Got it.
Oh, and then there's the COX-2 inhibitors, like celecoxib.
Oh, it's ring a bell. Were there some controversies around those?
There were. A lot of it had to do with cardiovascular safety.
Because they were supposed to be safer. Right.
Yeah, that was the idea. But there was this big trial, the precision trial. It was designed to compare celecoxib with naproxen and ibuprofen, specifically in patients with arthritis who already had a higher risk of heart problems.
So what did they find?
The trial concluded that none of the 3 drugs was significantly worse than the others in terms of major cardiovascular events, like heart attacks or strokes.
Oh, interesting.
But even though the trial was huge, There's been a lot of back and forth about the results.
Back forth.
Some researchers have raised questions about the design of the trial, how the data was interpreted.
So the jury's still out on which one is truly safer for the heart.
Pretty much. It's an ongoing debate.
That's science for you, right? Always evolving. Okay, so we've covered how naproxen is used, how it stacks up against other pain relievers.
Yeah,
Now let's talk about how this stuff is actually made. Can we get a little peek behind the curtain?
absolutely. So the manufacturing process is actually pretty complex, involves a bunch of different chemical steps, but a key part is something called asymmetric synthesis.
Asymmetric synthesis.
Yeah, it sounds complicated, but it's basically all about making sure they end up with the right version of the naproxen molecule.
Okay, back up. What do you mean by the right version?
So molecules can exist in these mirror image forms, like your left and right hands. They're called enantiomers.
Okay.
And with naproxen, only one of these enantiomers, the S enantiomer, is actually effective at relieving pain. The other one either doesn't work or it might even cause problems.
Ah, I see. So they have to be really careful during manufacturing to get mostly that good enantiomer.
Exactly, and that's where asymmetric synthesis comes in.
So how does that work?
There are a few different techniques. Like one way is called chiral resolution.
Chiral resolution.
It's kind of like sorting laundry.
Right.
Imagine you have a pile of left-handed gloves and right-handed gloves all mixed up.
Okay, I can picture that.
Chiral resolution is like separating those gloves.
Yeah.
Getting the ones you want and tossing the others. Another approach is asymmetric catalysis.
Catalysis.
It's like using a special tool that guides the chemical reaction in the right direction. So you end up with mostly the S enantiomer. It can involve things like asymmetric hydrogenation, hydroboration, different coupling reactions.
That sounds incredibly precise.
It is. It's chemistry on a super tiny scale, but super important to get it right.
For sure. So once they've made the naproxen, how do they check that it's safe to take?
Quality control is huge.
Huge.
Yeah, tons of tests.
Like what?
Okay, so they look at the appearance, make sure it looks right.
Yeah.
They check how well it dissolves. There are identification tests using infrared spectroscopy to confirm that it's actually naproxen and not something else.
Makes sense.
Then they do assays, often using high-performance liquid chromatography, HPLC. It's a way to measure exactly how much naproxen is present.
Okay.
And super important, they test the enantiomeric purity.
That's the left-hand, right-hand thing again, right?
Yep. Making sure there's not too much of the wrong version. They use techniques like chiral HPLC or optical rotation for that, plus other standard tests for things like moisture content, any leftover residue from the manufacturing process, heavy metals. Oh, and for tablets and capsules, they also test how well the drug dissolves and releases in the body to make sure it gets absorbed properly.
Wow. It's amazing how much goes into making sure each pill is safe and effective.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense process.
Okay. So we know how it's made. How about the whole approval process? Like, how did naproxen become an official medication?
Well, as we said before, it was first approved by the FDA as a prescription drug in 1976. And then later, Love got the green light for over-the-counter sales in 1994.
Two different pathways.
Exactly. The FDA in the U.S., the EMA in Europe, they have different levels of scrutiny depending on whether a drug is prescription or over-the-counter.
Makes sense. So have there been any big regulatory actions or safety warnings specifically about naproxen over the years?
Oh, absolutely. There have been quite a few, actually.
Like what?
Well, in 2005, the FDA had a big meeting about the potential cardiovascular risks of NSAIDs, which obviously includes naproxen.
Heart risks. That's a big one.
Definitely. And then in 2009, they added stronger warnings to all over-the-counter NSAID labels about the risk of serious stomach bleeding.
Wow.
Yeah, it's serious stuff. And probably most important, in 2015, both the FDA and the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, they made the warnings about cardiovascular risks even stronger.
What did those warnings say?
They emphasized that those risks can happen early in treatment and that they can get worse the higher the dose and the longer you take the drug. And that's even for people who don't already have heart problems.
So it's not just for people who are already at risk.
Nope, it's something everyone needs to be aware of. And then more recently, in 2020, the FDA recommended against using NSAIDs at 20 weeks of pregnancy or later because of the risk of kidney problems in the developing baby.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's not just the U.S. The EMA, around the same time, they actually recommended suspending certain modified-release paracetamol products.
Paracetamol, that's like acetaminophen, right?
Yeah, the same thing. And they did that because of concerns about overdoses.
So the safety of these everyday pain relievers is constantly being reevaluated.
Absolutely.
Okay. So given all these warnings about heart and stomach problems, it's no surprise that there's some controversy surrounding NSAIDs.
No surprise at all.
What are the main controversies about naproxen specifically?
Well, it all boils down to the risks we've been talking about. The potential harm to the gastrointestinal system, the cardiovascular system, the kidneys, and it all comes down to how NSAIDs actually work in the body.
How do they work?
So they inhibit these enzymes called KOX1 and KOX2. Blocking KOX2, that's what helps with pain and inflammation. But blocking KOX1 can mess with the stomach's protective lining and affect blood clotting.
So that's where the stomach problems come from.
Exactly.
Who is most likely to experience those GI side effects?
Several factors can increase the risk. Taking high doses of naproxen, using it for a long time, being older, having history of ulcers or stomach bleeding, taking other meds at the same time, like blood thinners or steroids, and drinking a lot of alcohol.
That's a lot of things to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's complex. And then there's the question of how naproxen's GI risk compares to other NSAIDs. Generally, it's thought to have a higher risk than acetaminophen, but the comparison to aspirin is debated. And some studies suggest that because naproxen lasts longer, it might actually have a higher risk of GI issues than ibuprofen, but it's still being studied.
What about the heart risks? Those seem to be the most concerning.
Yeah, they are serious. That's why they strengthened those warnings in 2015. And as we talked about, the precision trial was supposed to clear things up. But there are still questions about what the results really mean.
So it's still kind of a gray area.
Yeah, the debate continues. But the general advice is use the lowest effective dose for the shortest time possible, especially for people who already have heart disease or risk factors for it.
Okay, that makes sense. Have there been any big lawsuits or recalls related to naproxen safety?
So from what we could find, there haven't been any major recalls, specifically because of those inherent GI or cardiovascular risks we've been talking about, risks that are unique to naproxen itself. But that doesn't mean it's never happened.
What do you mean?
The FDA keeps databases of recalls.
Right.
And there have definitely been instances of other NSAIDs being recalled for different reasons, like manufacturing problems.
Got it.
But the whole safety issue around NSAIDs, that's definitely had a big impact on how these drugs are regulated, how doctors prescribe them, and how people use them.
Makes sense. Okay. Let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about money. What does the market for naproxen look like?
Oh, it's a big one. Both the brand name Naproxen, like Aleve and Naproxen and all the generic versions. I mean, Aleve going over the counter at 94, that opened up the market to a whole lot of people.
For sure. So how much money are we talking about? Millions? Billions?
It's hard to say for sure, because different sources report different numbers, and it depends on how they define the market. But to give you an idea, one report put the global naproxen market at around $228 million in 2024.
$228 million?
Yeah. And they project that it'll grow to over $500 million by 2035. Then there's another report focused just on naproxen sodium. Their numbers are a little different.
Okay.
But the big picture is the whole NSAID market is massive, estimated to be over $22 billion in 2024. And naproxen, it's a key player in that, so it's bringing in a lot of money.
So how do prices compare, like branded versus generic, prescription versus over-the-counter?
It's pretty typical for how pharmaceuticals work. Olay, since it's over-the-counter, is priced for consumers. It has to compete with other OTC pain relievers. Prescription naproxen, that's a different story, often comes in higher strengths, involves insurance coverage and all that.
Got it.
But the good news is generic naproxen, both prescription and OTC. They're usually way cheaper than the brand name stuff.
Which is great for consumers.
Absolutely. It makes it much more accessible. And that generic competition, it plays a huge role in the economics of the whole naproxen market.
Okay. So from humble yams to a multi-million, even billion-dollar industry.
It's quite the story.
Last thing I want to touch on is, how has naproxen impacted our culture and society?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, think about it. Naproxen, especially Aleve, it's become like a go-to solution for pain.
Right. It's just there in the medicine cabinet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really shaped how we deal with pain, how we think about over-the-counter medications. It's all about convenience and self-medication. We can just grab it and take it ourselves. We don't even have to think about it.
It's become so normalized.
Completely. And it's not just us.
What do you mean?
It's even made its way into clinical guidelines for treating certain conditions.
So it's officially recognized as a legitimate treatment option.
Yep. Which shows how much it's become integrated into modern medicine.
Wow. So from those labs in Mexico working with yams to being a household name, Naproxen has really come a long way.
It has. It really shows you how complex drug development can be, and how important regulations are, and how we're constantly learning about safety risks. It's a good reminder that even something as simple as the pain reliever has a whole world behind it.
A whole world of science, history, economics, culture. It's fascinating.
Totally.
Well, I think we've officially taken a deep dive into naproxen. We've explored its origins, how it's used, how it's made, all the regulations surrounding it, the safety concerns, the economic impact.
And even its role in society.
Exactly. It's been a journey.
It has. And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about.
Yeah.
Given all we've talked about, all the ongoing debate about the safety of NSAIDs, all the different pain relief options out there,
Yeah.
how do you navigate all of that? How do you make informed decisions about your own health?
It's a lot to consider.
It is. And we didn't even get into everything.
Right.
There's still questions about long-term effects, about the best ways to use these medications. So keep learning, do your own research, and most importantly, talk to your doctor. They can give you personalized advice based on your specific situation.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into naproxen. Until next time.
See you then.